try and imagine what an evening with Oscar would have been like. It's rather maddening because very many of the accounts we have of what it was like simply say that they can't tell you what it was like, but that he somehow managed to dominate and devastate and hypnotize and capture.
It smacked already of a slight decadence and something which wasn't quite what the sort of English gentleman should be doing.
Oscar Wilde lived in an era where homosexuality is a crime and standing against the crowd or new world views creates enemies. But he couldn't care less. He made a name for himself through his writing, his plays, and a lot of wit. Oscar Wilde was a Victorian poet, author, and gay idol, but he's especially known for his extraordinary skill in speech. He is, in modern times, a favorite when it comes to quotes. The people of the 21st century can appreciate his views and opinions when they are wrapped up in the flamboyance and sass that had slowly once made Oscar famous. The Victorian age is just about when literature that had once only been available to the successful and wealthy was shared with the public. People were just starting to appreciate the uniqueness in people, instead of shaming them, or sometimes burning them, which is clearly the key factor to Oscar's rise in fame. Yet Oscar Wilde fit into this era all wrong. He was discriminated against by those whom had never spoken to him for his history of questions, decadence, and defiance. And he just didn't care. He would even feed their anger with responses like, "I am so clever, sometimes I don't understand a single word of what I'm saying." This is the most unique you could be for that time period. To have someone so blatantly apathetic was unheard of, let alone by a smart and talented member of society, which is probably the reason why he appeals to many in the 21st century. And because of being himself, he got himself into very high places and very low places. Oscar was born into 1854 Ireland to very colorful parents. His father, Sir William, a well-known knighted author/eye-ear surgeon whom had a history of infidelity, and his mother, Lady Jane, Oscar's role model, an Irish poet and nationalist under the pen name Speranza, known for eccentric and subversive prose. Having a family of successful writers did wonders for Oscar's career choice. After getting out of homeschooling in secondary school, he was given a scholarship to Trinity College, where he studied literature and Greek history, which he became very interested in, and it plays into the decisions of his later years. Graduating at the top of his class, a portfolio full of poetry scattered among magazines and newspapers, and winning the Berkeley Gold Medal, he got a scholarship to the highly prestigious Magdalen College in Oxford. His time here was perhaps the beginning of when people started to realize his sense of decadence. He would happily and purposely go against the normal expectations of the time, wearing his hair long, brightly colored clothing, and packing his room with large objects like peacock feathers, flowers, large paintings, and especially blue china. After graduating, with both men in his intimate family dead, he sold his father's houses and used the money to move to London, where he moved into 1 Teat Street, with Frank Mills, a very connected artist. The next few years were spent in luxury. His new works were mostly poetry, and were unfortunately indifferently received. He also wrote his first play, Vera. That didn't go into production until later. Satires were made at his expense, but he laughed with them. In 1881, at age 27, he went touring through America, giving lectures on art history. After some warming up and adjusting to Oscar, and powering through a few lukewarm reviews, he became a hit. He did this through embracing and commercializing the insulting sunflower comment made by Punch magazine, a very popular magazine at the time. He even had to hire someone to cut their own hair and mail it to fans who had asked for his. He returned successful and credible to Europe. Then he decided to marry Constance Lloyd, a writer strikingly similar to his mother. They were quickly wed in 1884 and had 2 sons immediately, Cyril in 1885 and Vivian in 1886. Then he meets Robbie Ross. Robbie Ross was 17 and obsessed with the notion of seducing Oscar. He is speculated to be Oscar's first gay lover, using Oscar's love of Greek history against him as a display of the commonness of homosexuality. He and Robbie became very close friends, Robbie even introducing Wilde to John Gray, the supposed inspiration for the main character in Oscar's only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar eventually came out with his best-known works, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and his masterpiece, The Importance of Being Earnest. However, while this was going on, Oscar met Lord Alfred Douglas, or Bosie as his friends called him, his main muse. Bosie was a spoiled 21-year-old aristocrat, and was nothing but bad news for Oscar. Alas, Bosie was an educated young man who was familiar with Oscar's works and intent on having him. The two became lovers in the spring of 1892 and became inseparable. Oscar fell in love, doing anything Bosie asked, catering to his every whim with the money he was earning for his plays and poetry. But Bosie was reckless in public. He was needy and whiny and demanded to being at Oscar's side at all times. He often had outbursts at Oscar for seemingly pointless reasons, and often wanted physical contact at inappropriate times. Then he pulled Oscar into the underground gay prostitution ring of London, on Oscar's wallet, of course. But Bosie's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, grew suspicious of the two, as did the rest of London, and eventually demanded Oscar never to see his son again, or he would cut Bosie off from his allowance. Bosie was furious, and persuaded Oscar to sue him when he publicly embarrassed Oscar by accusing him of sodomy. Oscar obliged, against the advice of everyone else he knew, and sued Queensberry for criminal libel. Oscar's case failed and broke his wallet, having spent all of his money on Bosie. Queensberry, in turn, had Oscar arrested for gross indecency towards men. The first trial ended in a hanging jury, but the second trial was not as lucky. Due to the overwhelming evidence that the two had left behind, mostly Bosie, and the help from several male prostitutes who Bosie had slept with, given his clothing to, which had crumpled love letters from Oscar shoved into the pockets. Oscar was sentenced to 2 years hard labor at Pentonville. After suffering from depression, hunger, and disease, Oscar was transferred to Wandsworth. When his condition Oscar was let out in 1898, only to be greeted with his dead wife and not a trace of Bosie. He spent his last years in exile, staying with friends in Paris, too weak to write anything, eventually dying of meningitis in the year 1900, too high on morphine to care very much, broke, and thinking no one would ever read his works again. But this is incorrect. Oscar Wilde has had dozens of biographies written about him. His plays have been performed in some of the most amazing theaters around the world, and his works are studied in Ivy League college English courses every year. There are many amazing authors in history, and even openly gay authors. So why has Oscar Wilde caused all the interest and controversy? It's because Oscar is a type of leader that is rarely demonstrated in history. He is a leader of individuals and a fighter for individuality, a leader for leadership. He encouraged his audiences to follow their own paths, a message in everything he does to be an individual. Most leaders have followers. See any celebrated great leader, president, or war hero. But Oscar detested followers. He lived for the originality of the different. 100 years later, his works, writings, and lifestyle have inspired hundreds of songs and films. The Selfish Giant, Velvet Goldmine, Three Shadows, La Sainte Coursaine, the list goes on. His actions and choices are now some of the same taught by media and public education. Take Gay Pride, the act that he had once been left to rot in jail for, now has parades on television with hundreds of the LGBT community proudly displaying their colors. His message of the value of uniqueness that was once so alarming is now considered what is normal. Victorians would have been shocked, while the world is far more like Oscar Wilde envisioned than any other of their great men.